Research shows that students learn best from online lectures that are less than 11 minutes long, preferably 6 to 9 minutes. So with that in mind, I've broken the content up into several lectures for chapters that have a lot of content, such as Chapter 2. It's up to you how many you watch at a given time, but please be sure to watch them in order, otherwise the content won't make sense. This lecture will cover Chapter 2, Sections 2.1 to 2.5 in your textbook. These are the learning objectives for Chapter 2. This lecture will cover the first three. Describe HTML, XHTML, and HTML5, identify the markup language in a web page document, and use the HTML head, body, title, and meta elements to code a template for a web page. After completing all of Chapter 2, you should also be able to configure the body of a web page with headings, paragraphs, line breaks, divs, lists, and block quotes. Configure the text with phrase elements. Configure a web page using the new HTML5 header, nav, main, and footer elements. You'll also be able to configure special characters, use the anchor element to link from page to page, create absolute relative and email hyperlinks, code, save, and display a web page document, and test a web page document for valid syntax. Let's start with getting a grasp of what HTML actually is. HTML is a set of markup symbols or code placed in a file intended for display on a web browser page. The World Wide Web Consortium sets the standards for HTML and its related languages. Let's break this definition down a little. It says it is a set of markup symbols. This is important. HTML is not programming. It is marking up text or content to identify it. For example, when you and I see a paragraph on a website, we can tell it's a paragraph usually because there is an empty line before and after the block of text. This is because the person writing the code put a paragraph element where the paragraph starts and then closed it where the paragraph ends. The user doesn't see the code, but the browser now knows, hey, this is a paragraph. I better put an empty line before it and after it so the user will see it as a paragraph. We will cover this more as the lecture progresses. Who makes the decisions about these markup symbols? Well, the World Wide Web Consortium does. We discussed this in Chapter 1, but it is worthy of another discussion. If you go to the w3c.org website and look up the member list, you will see from this screenshot that as of June 12, 2019, the World Wide Web Consortium has 444 members. The list is alphabetical, so if you scroll through it, you will probably recognize some companies such as Adobe, Amazon, Apple, AT&T, etc. These are the members that make up the W3C, and they are the ones that make up the rules that govern HTML. Now that you have a little bit of an understanding of who is making the decisions regarding the code, let's dig into learning HTML. Each markup code represents an HTML element. Each element has a purpose and contains tags. Tags are enclosed using the angle brackets usually found on the comma and period keys on your keyboard. The left angle bracket, followed by the letter P, and then the right angle bracket, is the opening tag for a paragraph, and it is placed where a paragraph starts. The closing tag is made up with the left angle bracket followed by a slash found on the question mark key of your keyboard, and then the letter P followed by the right angle bracket. This closing paragraph tag is placed where the paragraph ends. Here's an example of how a paragraph would be marked up. You can see I have placed an opening paragraph tag at the front of the paragraph and a closing paragraph tag at the end of the paragraph. And it's that simple. You can see we are just marking up text with tags to write HTML. So let's talk a little bit about HTML in general. I don't want to spend too much time on the history of HTML, but what I want you to understand is that the rules and standards have changed over the years from when it was first invented. New elements have been added and other elements have been removed. When elements are removed, they are often referred to as being obsolete. The format of the tags has also changed throughout the various versions. At one time, the letters had to be all lowercase. At another time, all the letters had to be uppercase. Developers had to follow the rules to ensure that the web pages would work properly. HTML5 is the latest version. It took almost 7 years for HTML to go from its initial working draft in January 2008 until it was approved as a stable W3C recommendation in October of 2014. If any of you have ever worked in large groups, you can understand how it can take a long time to move forward. Here's an example of the HTML5 template. You should commit this to memory, and if you are taking notes, write this down as it is the foundation of all websites. We are going to break it down line by line, starting with the first line that shows the doc type. The document type definition, also referred to as the DTD, tells the browser what version of HTML you are using. It is placed at the top of every web page. Here are some examples of some doc type declarations. For HTML 4.01, which was before HTML5, you can see they were quite complicated. They also had strict, transitional, and frame set, and this was the code that had to be entered at the top of the web page. I always advised students to cut and paste the doc type when I was teaching HTML 4.01 because it was so complicated. With HTML5, it is quite simple. The code is simply left angle bracket, exclamation point, doc type, HTML, right angle bracket. In this example, they've used all capital letters. It doesn't really matter whether it's all capital or all lowercase, either is acceptable. But what I want you to do is to pick a way that you want to type it and then be consistent within your own workflow. Next, after the doc type declaration, is the opening HTML tag. Inside the HTML tag is the lang attribute. Attributes add further clarification to the element. The most common attribute for the HTML element is the lang attribute, which identifies what language the site is written in. In this case, the site is written in English, so EN is used. Declaring the language is not required, but it is very useful and easy to do and has become the norm. It helps the browser know what fonts and line spacing to use for the defaults. It also helps with hyphenation. Hyphenation rules are very language dependent. If you want to learn more about this, I suggest you visit the w3.org website. You will also see that the HTML tag is closed at the very bottom of the page. It is important to remember to close your HTML tag. A web page contains the head and the body. The head contains instructions to the browser, and the body is where all the content lives. First, we're going to talk about the head section. The head element comes immediately after the HTML element. You will notice that the head element is indented from the HTML. That is because it lives inside the HTML element. We will cover indentation in a little more detail in another lecture, but for now I want you to recognize that it is indented. Inside the head element is the title element. The title element is used to identify the title of the website. Whatever you type inside the title element is what shows up on the browser tab. The title tag is usually closed on the same line as the opening tag because there should only be a small amount of text in here. Here's an image of a website with a title tag of No So Touch and Feel Quiet Book. The text got truncated or cut short because the text is a little too long, but this image shows how the title element shows up in the browser tab. The title element is also what gets bookmarked if a user bookmarks a page, so you want to make sure it is descriptive of your website. After the title tag comes the meta-char set. If you are writing your pages in English, this is almost always going to be UTF-8. As you progress in this course, you will learn how to code special characters, such as a trademark symbol. When the browser detects code for a special character, it looks to the UTF-8 character set to determine what symbol to display when it comes across this code. We will discuss more about this when we get to the section on special characters. For now, what you need to know is that the meta-char set is required for all websites, and it belongs in the head. You might also have noticed that there is no close meta tag. The meta tag is a self-closing tag and does not require a closing tag. There are more elements that will live in the head, but we will get to those later. Now we are going to move on to the body. The body has an opening and closing tag, and all the content that you want to show up on the user's screen belongs in the body. I want to say that one more time. All the content that you want to show up on the user's screen belongs in the body. This is an easy concept, but for some reason students seem to struggle with this. Instructions to the browser belong in the head, and what the user sees on their screen belongs in the body. This wraps up part 1 of the Chapter 2 lecture. In this lecture, we covered the materials up through section 2.5 in your textbook.